Hello, beautiful beings. Thank you so very much for dropping by. Welcome to anyone who's new. This channel is about understanding the difference between authentic non-duality, often called Advaita Vedanta, and modernized Neo-Advaita or Neo-non-duality. Understanding that the two are very different teachings. How very dualistic of me, but they are very different teachings. Understanding how neo-non-duality is actually very harmful and how to recover from it. So someone reached out to me on Quora and said that they'd read some of my writings about Neo-Advaita and wanted to know, he was asking basically if my stance that modern teachers are misinterpreting what Ramana Maharshi taught. Love the question. Thank you. I really sat with it for a moment, and yes, misinterpreting, but I think more to the point, misrepresenting and cherry picking, above and beyond completely distorting. So misrepresenting. So, hey, Pat, good morning. So, first and foremost, in my view, there's two basic types of neo-non-duality or neo-Advaita teachers. There are the ones who say, just inquire, and there are the ones that say, there's nothing to do since you're already enlightened. So the ones who say, just inquire, are misrepresenting what Ramana Maharshi taught, because Ramana Maharshi taught that there's very stringent preparatory practices for self-inquiry, and he taught that most people are not qualified or prepared to do it. In fact, he said without these preparations, the path of self-inquiry is impossible. So that's for the just inquire neo-Advaita teachers. For there's nothing to do since you're already enlightened, well, Ramana Maharshi taught the exact opposite over and over and over, that effort was absolutely necessary. The people who teach that, I don't even call that Neo-Advaita. I call that Neo-Advaita. It's crazy beyond words. So that's the misrepresenting. The distorting, a lot of the distorting that goes on has to do with definitions of words. So Ramana Maharshi, as most Vedic teachers, say that the nature of ultimate reality is Sat Chit Ananda. There's many different ways to translate those three words. The ones that make the most sense to me are eternal, joyful, or peaceful, peace, joy, consciousness. Sat Chit Ananda. You could spend a lifetime meditating on those words, and they're very deep words. But regardless, all the sages of Vedic philosophy, of which Advaita Vedanta is one type of Vedic philosophy, say that that is the ultimate nature of reality. So Neo-Advaita teachers come in and say that the ultimate nature of reality is nothingness, non-existence. Now, not all of them, but most of them are heavily focused on nothingness or non-existence. Now, this is also an extreme distortion, because what Neo-Advaita teachers do will say there's the self or consciousness, and then there's the world. The self exists, the world does not exist. So, and then on top of it, they'll say that the nature of the self is emptiness or nothingness. So that's the basic Neo-Advaita teacher. Now here is what Advaita Vedanta teaches. Here's what Ramana Maharshi taught. The nature of the self is Sat Chit Ananda. The world, so let's get really clear. Sat Chit Ananda, eternal, peaceful consciousness. That's the nature of the self, according to Ramana Maharshi. And then there is the world, or creation, which includes body, mind, everything other than eternal joyful consciousness. And then the world is not eternal joyful consciousness. So there's kind of this process of, okay, so there's these two things. There's the self and there's the world. And then you realize, okay, the nature of the self, and then comes the ultimate mystery that the world, even though the world is not eternal, even though the mind is not joyful and wise, that ultimately the world is that too. That these things that appear to be very separate actually are one. That's why it's called non-duality or not two-ness, which in my view is a better translation of the word Advaita. So you can see the messages are completely different, radically different. Let's look at it again. Neo-Advaita. Only consciousness exists. The world doesn't exist. So the world is non-existent. And then the nature of consciousness is emptiness. So ultimately, even that doesn't exist. That's the Neo-Advaita paradigm. The Advaita Vedanta paradigm is the nature of the self is eternal, joyful consciousness. The nature of the world is a temporary, fleeting, like a river. It's constantly moving. It's never the same. Like you can take a picture of a river, but any moment you look at the river, it's already gone. Like it's just in constant motion and fluctuation. So these two things are very distinct. That's kind of, you could say, stage one of Advaita Vedanta. Stage two is realizing in your experience that I am Sat Chit Ananda. I am eternal joyful consciousness. And then with that, there's the recognition, oh my Lord, this thing, this world, this mind, this body, which is constantly in fluctuation, constantly changing, which appears to be the opposite of eternal joyful consciousness, is actually made up of the nature of, one and the same. So as you can see, Neo-Advaita teachers completely misrepresent what Ramana Maharshi taught. They completely distort what Ramana Maharshi taught, but even more so, just the entire Vedic paradigm or Advaita Vedanta paradigm. And the way they do this is through cherry picking. Yes, you can find statements here and there where Ramana will say something like, just be. Like 1% of 1% of his teaching is teachings where he said, just be as you are. That's all you need to do. And so Neo-Advaita teachers will take that and then they'll throw away all the other teachings. What they won't tell you is that that statement that Ramana made was to one person, to one specific person in one moment. So once you are in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, when you have properly prepared, then such a person who's properly prepared can live a teaching like that. Just be as you are, if you're properly prepared. So if you read Ramana Maharshi's works, especially his unedited work, the best one I'm aware of is Day by Day with Bhagavan, what you'll see is most of the time that's not what he taught. In fact, most of the time he taught the opposite. He would teach philosophy, he would teach preparatory practices. Sometimes he would teach nothing. He would just sit in silence. He didn't give talks. Like right now, I'm giving a talk. I've got 2 live viewers. I had 3. I guess maybe I just scared one away. I have 2 live viewers, and then other people will come watch this. I'm giving a talk to an audience. That's not how Ramana Maharshi taught. He taught one-on-one. Other people wrote it down, and then along come the Neo-Advaita teachers, and will take just the parts that they like. They will ignore the rest. And in fact, they'll take that 1% of 1% and they'll use it, and they will attack the 99.9% of what Ramana Maharshi actually taught. It's insane. I was thinking about it recently. Like, I don't get into religious conversations with fundamentalist Christians. Fundamentalist Christians believe the Bible is literally true, and that everyone who isn't a Christian is going to be tortured by God forever. And simultaneously, they believe that God is love. Like, I don't debate with people like that. Now, I can have a conversation with a fundamentalist Christian about spiritual principles like humility and prayer and charity and faith and detachment from the world and trusting in God. But like, why would I even carry on a conversation with someone who believes the things I just said? Like, from my point of view, they are effing insane. Same. Like, I don't engage with Neo-Advaita teachers because, from my point of view, it's so hard for me to say from my point of view, but I need to be humble. Like, I'm not a master, I'm not enlightened. From my point of view, they believe insane things. Now, I can't really prove that what they believe is insane, but I can very strongly prove that it's completely different from what Ramana Maharshi taught and all the other Advaita Vedanta teachers have been teaching for I think it's been over 1,200 years now. I can report how Neo-Advaita teachings drove me insane, and I can report how other people have gone nutso and even killed themselves following Neo-Advaita teachers. Pat wrote, driving in my car in Brooklyn might lose your work. I don't exactly know what that means, but it makes me smile to hear you're driving through Brooklyn and hearing me deconstruct some Neo-Advaita. So let's see if there's anything else I want to share. So the original question was, do modern teachers, I don't even like to call them teachers personally, I would say preachers, do modern Neo-Advaita preachers misinterpret Ramana Maharshi's teachings? I personally feel that calling it misinterpretation is being too generous. It's straight up distortion and straight up misrepresentation. Someone's asked me if I want to do an interview with them, and I might do it. And it has me thinking, like, what is my message? Like, what is my core message? What am I teaching here? Because I am teaching. I'm not teaching Advaita Vedanta. I'm not teaching people how to attain self-realization. But what I teach on this channel is really three things. One, Advaita Vedanta, Neo-Advaita, modernized non-duality, sometimes called radical non-duality, or non-compromising non-duality, often just called non-duality, is completely different from Advaita Vedanta. You cannot follow both. You cannot follow Ramana Maharshi and these modern teachings. It's like trying to be a Christian and an atheist. But it's more confusing than that. It'd be like trying to be a Christian atheist. Like, how confusing would that be? I'll circle around to that in a moment. So message number one, modernized non-duality teaches something completely different from Advaita Vedanta, but it uses some of the same language, and hence why it's so confusing. Number two, modernized non-duality is harmful. Number three, how to recover from modernized non-duality. That's pretty much all I teach here on this channel. So you can't follow Ramana Maharshi and Muji or Rupa Sapira. What's his name? Rupa Spira or whatever. You can't follow Ramana Maharshi and a modernized neo-non-duality teaching. They're just night and day. It's like being a Christian atheist. A Christian believes in God, believes in miracles. An atheist doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in miracles. Can you imagine a Christian atheist who would like use some of the language of Christianity, like God and miracles, but not believe in God and miracles? You would go nutso. You'd go absolutely nutso. And that's basically what Neo-Advaita is. It's borrowing the language of Advaita Vedanta and twisting it and distorting it to such an extreme measure that not only will you not progress spiritually, it'll take you in a downward direction. And if you really take it seriously, it'll drive you crazy. I would know. I've met many other people who it has as well. So that's what's on my mind and heart today. And one thing that I've offered kind of general ideas for how to recover from Neo-Advaita. And the first step is recognizing the difference. The second is stopping, like not engaging with Neo-Advaita teachers or teachings. I just have to say, Theravada Buddhism, which is sort of historically one of the earlier forms of Buddhism, is really good medicine for me. It's been good medicine for me because in some ways it's kind of, I won't say anti-philosophical, but it points out that you only need just a little bit of philosophy, and that too much philosophy, especially metaphysical or philosophical speculation, actually builds up. They don't use the word ego in Buddhism, but just for convenience, I'll say it builds up the mind. Specifically in Buddhism, it builds up attachment and aversion. It leads to further suffering. And so to step out of because Neo-Advaita, it creates all this question. It creates so many questions. Do I exist? Do I not exist? Does the world exist? Does it not exist? Will I exist after enlightenment? After enlightenment, will I vanish? Did I exist before this present moment? Will I exist in the next moment? Did I exist before this body was born? Will I exist after it? It creates all these questions and really offers no answers. And so it just kind of creates this mental whirlwind. Whereas, Theravada Buddhism, this very early form of Buddhism, it says things like, does the world exist? If you say the world exists or you say the world doesn't exist, you become bound to either of those views. And those views then create a fetter, which is a very interesting word. A fetter is like a trap, a kind of trap. So again, according to early Buddhism, if you take the view the world exists, if you take the view the world doesn't exist, either one of those views creates a mind trap. And so what is Neo-Advaita? And the Buddha said this very specifically about the existence or the non-existence of you, of the self, of a self. If you take the view, I don't exist, or if you take the view, I do exist, the Buddha directly said, it's a quote, like we don't have a tape recording, right? But written quote, that will create a forest of views that will trap you. And that's all Neo-Advaita is, a forest of views. It's a forest of views, and then it says, just inquire. Like it says, don't believe, the teacher will say, like, don't believe anything except what I tell you, and or just inquire. I mean, that's why I say that Neo-Advaita, there's nothing to do since you're already enlightened, is the worst of the worst, because it's just a thicket, a forest of views that just gets you circling and cycling. I would know. I spent over 20 years being like, do I exist? Do I not exist? Should I do nothing? Can I do nothing? Is the world real? Is the world an illusion? Like, and Neo-Advaita, don't do anything because you're already enlightened, is the worst. At least with Neo-Advaita, you're making some kind of effort. Neo-Advaita is the just inquire type. At least with that, you're doing even if it's the wrong spiritual practice for you, because as I've said, all the great teachers have said you have to be prepared and qualified for it. At least you're meditating, and you're going to make, even if you're doing the wrong meditation, you'll have an experience or a connection with reality. And so there's at least a little positivity in Neo-Advaita. But in Neo-Advaita, it's just like a whirlwind of false views. It builds up the collection of views, and then it creates questions which has no resolution. And again, this is something I appreciate about Theravada early Buddhism. The Buddha, it's written that the Buddha gave an analogy. He said, if you were shot with a poisoned arrow, would you ask, who is it who shot the arrow? Why did they shoot me? Where did they go to gather the materials? How long did they, and I'm paraphrasing here, how long did they spend making the poison? Did they do this out of vindictiveness, or were they ordered to do it? Like, would you have all these questions, or would you be like, what's the antidote? So Neo-Advaita and Neo-Advaita just generate all these questions that don't help the problem. The problem is we're suffering, and or depending on how you want to look at it, we're suffering, and or we're disconnected from reality. And I'd say the two are probably one and the same, but depending on whether you're coming at it from a Buddhist perspective or a more Advaita perspective. And so Neo-Advaita teachers say, this philosophy I'm teaching you, which isn't a philosophy, but it is. It's a delusional philosophy of that. The Neo-Advaita teachers say, hey, what I'm teaching you will lead you out of suffering. It will lead you to realize you've never been suffering, but it doesn't work. And then the Neo-Advaita teachers say, hey, just practice self-inquiry. That'll lead you out of suffering into reality. And it doesn't work. It works in the short term. Both of them work in the short term. That's the problem. And that's why I've been likening it to an addiction, because in the short term, if you have problems and you go get drunk, your problems go away for a little bit, for a few minutes, an hour, if you're lucky, for an evening, and then you fall asleep and you wake up hungover, not feeling well, and your problems are still there. So Neo-Advaita and Neo-Advaita don't resolve the problem. Yeah, so wow. Thought this was going to be a short one, but once I get going, I get going. I'm just so passionate about it because I just have, as I'm sitting here giving this talk, I just remember like laying in my bed being like, do I exist? Does the world exist? Does life have any meaning? Should I just stay here and meditate? Can I meditate? Is there a me? What's the point of it all? Over and over and over for 20 years. I mean, I didn't lay in my bed for 20 years, but I just have this memory of just being so fucking confused. And I primarily went to a Neo-Advaita teacher who taught, the just inquire, and just being like, at a certain point, every time I would practice self-inquiry, I'd feel suicidal. That was one of the things that helped break me free, is like, not only is this not working, it's obviously taking me in a downward direction. So just say no to Neo-Advaita. Thank you so very much for dropping by. And I wish all of you a good Neo-Advaita free day and a good day of recovering from nonsense, non-duality. Take care.